Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and thank you so much for joining us today. I should actually recant that and say, today I'm not actually your host. Today is episode 50, so we decided to mix things up just a little bit and bring on a guest that has been in all of the first 49 episodes, but never actually interviewed me. So my story has been dripped in throughout the show, but we've had some listeners asking for a full recap of my career up until this point, so we decided to have a go of it. So Michael Kitces is actually on the other side of the mic for this episode, and we started at the beginning of how I found financial planning, my path through getting fired, divorced, starting an RIA, selling that RIA, and founding XYPN, not necessarily all in that order, but I'm hoping this episode is helpful and gives a little bit of clarity to listeners about my career path. As always, you can access the show notes and additional resources at xyplanningnetwork.com/50. Now, don't forget to sign up for XYPN 16, our national conference, which will be held in San Diego, September 18th through the 21st. And if you join the VIP group at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP, we'll be posting some major conference ticket discounts as a thank you for your involvement. So without further ado, here is the interview with me and Michael Kitces.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to XYPN Radio. This is Michael Kitces. I am sitting in the host chair this week for XYPN Radio to celebrate episode number 50. Alan has turned over the reins and let me steer this thing. For the incredibly exciting and unique special guest to celebrate our 50th episode, Mr. Alan Moore. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be on.
I'm thrilled to have you here. We kicked off this podcast a long time ago with you giving me the opportunity to tell my story. And so I love this idea that for episode 50, we will finally circle back and hear your story after nearly a year now of you interviewing everybody else and nobody ever actually coming to interview you. It's a good thing I was here to step in as an interviewer for you, or you just have to talk into a microphone alone for an hour.
You know, the Toby Keith song, I want to talk about me, want to talk about, that's the only thing I can keep thinking about. I love being on the, as the interviewer, but obviously my story has gotten trickled into quite a few episodes. Obviously, whenever I interject something, and we've gotten some requests lately for like, hey, could you put it all together and give us a coherent timeline for what in the world has been happening? So, so this should be fun. It'll be different being on the answering side as opposed to the asking side.
Well, and likewise for me, you're an incredibly good interviewer for this podcast. So I have to admit, I actually feel very intimidated to be in the interviewer seat myself now, where you've set this history of asking people great questions through interviews for 49 episodes leading up to this. So I'm going to do my best to not completely drop the ball.
Well, thank you. And that may be the third compliment I've ever gotten from you in 5 years. So this is, I don't know about this. All right. Thanks for setting the stage.
I think the prior two were also both about you being a really good interviewer.
I agree.
All right. So I guess starts at the beginning. Where are you from, and how did you find this crazy thing called financial planning?
You know, I actually will go all the way back to in first grade. My mother and father pulled us out of school. And so I actually started homeschooling us starting in the second grade and all the way through high school. And I'll say that because I think it gives a lot of, I don't know, maybe helps explain some of my inability to respect authority. I never learned how to ask permission to go to the bathroom or any of the other social norms that you learn when in college, that you learn whenever you're in school. And I didn't learn them until I got to college and realized that you can't just do what you want to do whenever you want to do it. But I'll give my dad a lot of credit. He taught me a lot about, critical thinking skills and just logic problems. That was kind of his thing. And so when I got to college, I took the traditional path, I guess. I was told that, what do you look for in a college degree? And it is a great, stable job that pays well, right? Like that's what we're all supposed to look for.
Every parent's wish for their child going to college, just get a job major in something that will get you a job when you get out of school.
Like get a job, get something prestigious. And so I actually, through some research, learned that the quickest path to a doctorate was to become a pharmacist. So the PharmD designation takes you about 6 years of college. And I thought, yeah, this will be good. Like, it's 4 years of undergrad, 2 years of pharmacy school. How hard can it be? And so I went to the University of Georgia, did not know a single person in the county or much less at the actual 30,000 person school, and dove in. And that's when I learned that professors were expecting certain things from me that I wasn't willing to give them just because they asked for it. And that's when I learned my hard-headedness was going to have to bend just a little bit. But, I went to school to be a pharmacist. And in my first semester of college, took Chemistry 101. And it was the only class I ever withdrew from in college for my all 6 years that I was there. And apparently you have to take chemistry every semester when you're in college to be a pharmacist. So that career wasn't going to work.
It turns out that pharmaceutical drugs have a lot to do with their underlying chemical makeups.
For anybody that's out there that took chemistry, if you can explain naming compounds to me, it's unbelievable. It was like there were rules and then there were exceptions to the rules and exceptions to the exceptions to the exceptions that looped you back to the original rules. It just didn't work out. Anyway, so I went on the hunt for a degree, and I kid you not, the way I found my next degree, which was consumer economics. Yes, I understand it used to be called home economics. I was unaware of that whenever I signed up. I wanted two things out of my college career. I wanted no more life sciences because I figured it was never going to work and biology didn't sound any better than chemistry, and no foreign language. Not because I have anything against foreign language. It was just really hard for me to learn Spanish in high school, and I didn't want to go through it again. And there were a combined something like 7 majors at the University of Georgia out of like 180 that met those criteria. So I picked the one that had the word economics in it, which was cool. And so I ended up a consumer econ major, along with all the football players. And anyone who's at the University of Georgia knows, like literally 30 football players were in our degree program. So anyway, so long story short, I ended up taking a elective that I thought was personal finance for myself, like learning how to budget, learning how to like manage my own finances. And of course, had no idea what degree I was going to get with, or what job I was going to get with the degree of consumer economics. And it ended up being the Intro Fundamentals to Financial Planning class. So I took the first CFP course without even realizing that that's what it was. And that's ultimately how I discovered financial planning.
So was there a financial planning program at University of Georgia at this time? Did you find yourself in the middle of the whole CFP undergrad program there?
Exactly. So it had only gotten started about 2 or 3 years before I was in there. I was in kind of the second graduating class of the financial planning program. But yeah, I was fortunate enough to find, my degree is in family financial planning. And so when I was there, my degree qualified me to sit for the CFP.
So you took this first financial planning class and you just thought, gee, all this money stuff is cool? Like, what clicked in the first class that suddenly veered you in this direction?
So probably the most influential person in my college career was Dr. Joe Getz out of UGA, and also owns a planning firm with his wife there in Athens. And his background was that he had a master's in psychology and a PhD in financial planning. And he introduced me to real financial planning from day one. And I didn't even know that this whole like technical financial planning world really existed. We were very much shielded from it inside of our program because everything that we did had this kind of psychology undertone to it. We took a financial counseling class, not about counseling low income, but literally an integration of psychology and money course as undergrads. And so I just fell in love with the fact that I got to work with people and I got to work with numbers, and which was actually funny because whenever I first got in financial planning, my mom very sweetly said, you weren't very good at math in high school. It's like, no, there's so much more to it. And there really was. And so that kind of intro class covered a little bit of everything and kind of showcased what financial planning was. And I'll admit, I went from a barely 3.0 student to I basically had like a 3.8 or a 3.9 starting once I found financial planning. I just fell in love with it and kind of hit my stride.
So you plowed straight through, you finished your undergrad, you got a degree in family financial planning. Mm-hmm. And what next?
I was going to graduate in the summer of 2009. Probably the best year in history as a financial planning major to
Fantastic
get a job.
Timing to come into the job marketplace.
Oh man, the grade above us, they all had jobs before their senior year. And I mean, there was nothing for us. I mean, we were struggling. I mean, I was interviewing at Northwestern Mutual and Ameriprise, which for anyone that knows me knows how unlikely that is. But
so you couldn't even find a sales job in our business.
No, it was a bad time. But I was really torn, honestly. Whenever I discovered financial planning, I learned that I had this kind of knack, this desire to educate, and I also had the desire to do financial planning. And I kind of wanted to be Dr. Getz, who was a researcher, a teacher, and financial planner. And I just kind of saw this path of I can do all of it, which looks really fun. And so kind of looked at my options and decided, well, why not stay for grad school? And so I chatted with the professors there at UGA and I said, hey, if I stay, and some of them had encouraged me to stay and get on some research grants and that sort of thing. And said, well, if you'll stay, or if I stay, will you let me teach? And they said, sure. They were in desperate need of some additional classes to be taught. And so I basically that was how I got paid as a grad student, was I taught a couple of the undergraduate courses in financial planning while a grad student and kind of went through my master's program. And so it made it so that I got a taste of a little bit of everything, because I was writing my thesis and doing all the research and data analysis that comes with that. I was teaching. I taught 2 courses, as well as, did some internships, which we can talk more about, in order to kind of learn the actual financial planning side of things, and really had the opportunity to dive in deep to find what I loved. And more importantly, in my case, find what I didn't love.
So you're fully in on this master's in financial planning program. You're doing teaching, you're getting through your coursework itself. At this point, are you still imagining in your head that when you finish the master's program, now maybe you're going to go in and teach? Or I guess you may have to get a PhD to do that. Or are you still expecting no, this is just a 2-year waypoint, and then I'm going to get back and find a financial planning job in the outside of the university system?
That's a great question, because I actually was not originally enrolled in the master's program. I was enrolled in the PhD program. So Georgia at the time, and I think is still only one of a handful of universities that have a PhD in financial planning. And so we had this skip your master's, go straight to the PhD option that a student before me, kind of in the class before me, had done. And so I said, hey, I'll do this. And this is actually an instance where my arrogance got the best of me.
The one time in your life,
the only time that I noticed. No, and because I had actually decided on grad school in March when I was graduating in May. And so I literally had one day to take the GRE. So I took the GRE, didn't study for it, did fine. Not so good on the writing portion, because you literally write an essay into Notepad, which was a struggle, but a couple of essays. But anyway, so I say all of that to say that I was on this kind of PhD track, and actually there was supposed to be a meeting among the professors on whether or not to keep me in the PhD track or to push me back to the master's track. And I wasn't really in tune with what was going on. I think again, my arrogance just kind of said oh, of course they'll push me through the PhD. Why wouldn't they? And my understanding of that meeting is they actually changed the entry requirements for the PhD program in that meeting, and then voted on whether or not I would get in. And they increased the entry requirements beyond my test scores. And so basically precluded me from being in the PhD program. And I'll admit,
but they didn't say no to you. They just changed the requirements.
Said no. Exactly. And one of the best things, obviously, when we look back, great thing for my career, but that was actually what kicked me back to the master's program. And, all my courses counted and everything was on track. But instead of looking at the PhD, I was going to have to finish my master's and then enroll in the PhD, which was going to take 2 extra years. And so in the middle of that, I kind of saw what academia was. I saw kind of the heart of academia, which was very bureaucratic, a lot of red tape, a lot of I'm sorry I didn't ask the right person if I could move my desk 3 inches to the left. And just realized that academia
great place for a person that has little respect for authority.
Exactly. All tying back in. And I realized academia at the time probably wasn't going to be the right fit. And so I kind of called an audible and started looking for internships and kind of started planning for graduation. So I guess I don't even know how old at the time. So this would have been 2010. So spring of 2010, kind of when this was going on. So I would have been 23, I guess. And then in the summer, I found my second internship, I guess, with Rick Kaler out in South Dakota, which kind of set the stage for kind of future plans, I guess.
So out of curiosity, as a quick digression, how does a dude in Athens, Georgia find an internship in South Dakota?
Caleb Brown with New Planner Recruiting was very influential there. So there were a couple of pieces that kind of a perfect storm, when you look back and you just think, gosh, you just get so lucky. I was taking financial counseling class and happened to see a job posting, I believe on New Planner Recruiting, or I think maybe it was on the NAPFA website that New Planner Recruiting had posted. And it was this guy talking about how he had basically been involved in the founding of financial therapy and the blending of psychology and money and all this. And I was like, that's not true. Like, this guy didn't do that. The author of my textbook did this. And whenever I looked at it, I realized it was the same person. So, he had actually written the textbook on financial therapy. And I think it was Facilitating Financial Health was the book. And so luck would have it, I had recently won a scholarship to attend the NAPFA National Conference that May in Chicago, and Rick was going to be there, and Caleb was there facilitating interviews with people like Rick. So I interviewed with him in basically the first week of May and got an internship starting in June. And so I moved out to South Dakota for 9 weeks. Again, luck would have it, Rick owned a real estate leasing company, and so a property management company. So he was able to get me a 9-week lease
Sweet. On
an apartment in Rapid City, and basically did a long internship, or I guess a long job interview is how I would say it. Anyway, so I came home after that. He offered me a full-time position starting in January because that's when classes would be done. So I went back and kind of had an interesting decision to make around writing my thesis, which anyone who's written a thesis knows this is a big decision to make. Do I write my thesis or do I sit for the CFP? Because luckily my undergrad qualified me to sit for the CFP. I didn't have to wait till I graduated from grad school. Ended up choosing CFP route and sat for the CFP in November, and then basically moved out to South Dakota in January. So it would have been 2011, having passed the CFP and basically completed my master's except for my thesis. And that's kind of where my career started.
So you land in South Dakota for your first financial planning job. Is that culture shock? Where did you actually grow up before you landed at University of Georgia? Where was home for you originally?
The South, I would say. We moved around quite a bit when I was a kid. I think I lived in 9 houses before I was 12. So we bounced around Alabama, Georgia. I spent 6 weeks in North Carolina, which is a story for another day.
Places with similar small towns, slightly different weather.
Just a little bit. I'll admit I'm a sucker for the snow. It's why I'm currently sitting in Bozeman, Montana. I do like the cold weather a lot more than I like the heat. So the culture shock wasn't so bad. I liked Rapid City. I thought it was a great town. It's a bigger city than you expect. God's country, as Rick would say. And honestly, you could not ask for a better first employer than Rick Kaler. I mean, the guy has done it all. He's been involved, I guess for 30 years in the fee-only profession. But he really took the time to hone a loose cannon, which obviously still am a little bit, but he took a really raw, I'll say talent, I'll brag, maybe a raw talent, and that was full of energy and full of ideas and full of, let's dive into the deep end to see if I know how to swim, and really honed me and showed me, again, what real financial planning was. He took the technical analysis that we learned in the CFP and made it applicable. I mean, in one of our first meetings, something got thrown a client threw something in the meeting. And so I learned very quickly how you deal with things like that. So it was a great experience. I loved working there.
I've been doing this a long time. I've never had a client throw something in a meeting. I'm trying to figure out whether I'm doing it wrong now. Apparently, I need to spend some time with Rick and figure out how to get to another level with my clients.
Hey, we had a therapist on retainer to come in and work with our clients. So, I mean, we definitely went into some deep things, but it was a kind of a weird estate planning situation. And the wife got mad and the meeting was done. And Rick said, well, I guess we'll circle up next week and try this again. And we did. So anyways, it was kind of an amusing experience, but it was the only time I think something's actually been thrown. But there were a lot of tears in Rick's office. I remember Carl Richards in one of his podcasts, he said, I always lead into the discovery meeting with someone's going to cry today and it ain't going to be me. That was kind of Rick's approach as well.
All right. So I'm curious, at what point did you come to realize that this path that you'd taken into financial planning at the intersection of planning and psychology, planning and therapy, what you were learning from Dr. Getz, what you were getting into at Rick, at what point did you realize that this is not actually how the other 95% of people who call themselves financial planners do it?
It took me a very long time. It was not a quick process because I wasn't around it. I mean, like I said, I grew up in financial therapy, essentially. And so I didn't really realize it until, really after I owned my own firm, maybe, and I was having conversations with other planners and realized just how out of the box we were. Because I remember interviewing with Mosaic I've interviewed with like half the fee-only firms out there. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. But I remember interviewing with Gillian
Kendall.
Thank you. Gillian Kendall out of San Francisco. And she said, what's the difference between financial planning and life planning? And I said, there is no difference. Life planning is financial planning. It's just good financial planning. And she was laughing because she said that was her approach as well. But I didn't know that people didn't think that way. Probably, it took me several years, honestly.
So you're immersed in Rick's firm. He's crafting you into a financial planner as best he can to rein you in. So you're obviously not still at Rick's firm today. So what happened? What came next in this career journey for you?
Yeah, we can start mapping out dates. So January of 2011, I get there. Probably sometime in the summer, I realized that it wasn't going to be a long-term fit. And it had absolutely nothing to do with Rick, and it had everything to do with the team that he had assembled. And it was that, he was making good money. He had, 75 or 80 clients when I was there. We had 150 million under management. Everyone's happy. And I kind of came in with this, let's blow it up. Let's grow in a good way. Let's grow this thing. We've got the foundation in place, let's see what we can do. Let's try new things. Let's try new technology. And the team was kind of in this, we're happy where things are. It was a good learning experience for me because I learned that sometimes the team that gets you to that point isn't necessarily the same people that get you to the next level. Some of those people had really helped Rick build the firm from scratch, and he had a very well-deserved commitment to them. And, he didn't tell me that I had to choose or anything like that. But when we looked at it, I just said, the culture here is not going to be, there's always going to be conflict. When you have this young, energetic, let's go experiment guy, and then you've got kind of the team that's saying, we really like how things are, kind of don't mess with my space, don't touch my stuff. It just made it really hard. And so I had an honest conversation with Rick in probably August of 11 and just said, hey, man, I just don't think this is going to work. And he said he understood and basically said that I had a job as long as I wanted it, and to start interviewing other places and to be sure I told everybody they could call him and he'd tell them the truth about me. And he did. And he didn't say it wasn't 100% positive, but he told the truth, which was really helpful. And so that's kind of when I started looking for other positions. Basically, I don't know, 8 to 9 months into that job.
Okay. And so I know you have some involvement in NAPFA as well. So where did your exposure to NAPFA start filtering into this as well?
So I guess in that's really right after I started working for Rick, Dave Grant called and asked if I wanted to be involved in the NAPFA Genesis Committee. And so I got involved there. And actually, I started working with you that spring as your research associate because I was like, I can do research. I wrote a thesis. This will be easy. It is not easy. You were way more detail oriented than my professors. So Anyway, that's again a story for another day. And so but I knew a lot of planners because of my involvement. I had been to a couple national conferences at that point and interviewed a lot of different places. And I just really struggled to find, maybe this is to answer your question, when I started learning what real financial planning was, because I started interviewing at investment only firms and they would say, yeah, we do financial planning. And I'd start digging in. I'm like, this isn't financial planning. Or I remember one, I was getting a weird vibe about their investment process. And finally I said, what did you do in 2008? And they said, well, we went to cash. And, basically all cash at the bottom of the market. I was like, okay, we're done. Literally ended the interview.
At the bottom, not at the top. Because if they went in the top, that would be an interesting conversation.
Exactly. No. And so I interviewed a lot of different places, and then I found what I thought was going to be my dream job. And I should take a step back. Rick's firm was the dream job. He was 55 years old, I think, when I got that job there. I was going to be the succession plan. I was going to come in 5 to 10 years. I was going to get equity and take over the firm, right? I was going to buy a multi-million-dollar business producing $1 million in income. It was going to be great, right? It's just like the golden ticket. And my parents, it took them years to understand why I left Rick's firm. They're like, why would you leave this perfect opportunity? Just like stop trying to blow things up and just chill out a little bit. And so I went looking for another golden ticket, and I found it with a firm in Racine, Wisconsin, financial service group with Mike Halbrick and Justice Morgan, and started interviewing there. And they had this vision for almost like this franchise model that basically I come in, I train for 3 years, get my feet under me, learn their process, and then I could go open my own franchise somewhere else, whatever city I wanted to, kind of underneath this model. And it sounded like a great model.
So and kind of be like a branch location for them, but under the parent firm. And okay.
Yeah. So I moved, so again, I started in Georgia. And we'll talk more about this in a minute, but I got married actually right before I took that job in South Dakota. So right out of grad school. And so we moved out to South Dakota. Then we moved to Racine, Wisconsin. So we are moving all over the country. And so got settled in and kind of got started there as an associate advisor and was there for a total of 6 months before I got myself fired.
Got fired. So not just you figuring out this isn't working, but the other side. So how did you get fired?
They kind of had this model of a level 1 was like lead planner, level 2 was associate, level 3 was assistant planner. And I'll say that it all comes down to, and I can rant and rave and say what I want, but ultimately it came down to the fact that they hired a level 1 lead planner personality, paid me like an associate, a level 2, and then had me doing the work of a level 3 assistant. And it was just a match made in hell from day one because just everything was wrong in terms of how much I was being paid for the work that I was doing versus the personality that I had and the type of work I wanted to be doing. And now I know there's some firm owners out there that are hearing this and they're like, wait, aren't you 24 years old at the time?
I was going to raise it here too. Like, just to be clear, you're kind of doing this quintessential millennial thing.
Oh, like, yeah, absolutely.
I'm 24 and I have 8 months of experience at my prior firm. Why aren't I a level 1 financial planner yet?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Give me the keys to the kingdom, right? And I had the personality. I knew I wanted to be a lead planner. I just didn't understand why everybody kept telling me I had to wait. I didn't know what else I needed to learn before I just tried it. And people that know me know I'm a dive into the deep end of the pool to learn if I can swim. What I hoped to find was a Rick Kaler, which I did. And I hope to find a second one, which was somebody to, come save me if I didn't, come up for air after a couple of minutes, and just didn't find it at that firm. And so, maybe just 2 weeks after my 25th birthday, came in on a Friday afternoon, and the boss said, basically, don't come back on Monday, go pack your things. And that was it. And 6 months in. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience because I'm the personality to get fired. I actually haven't been as fired. I have not been fired from as many jobs as people would expect. I usually quit before I get fired.
I was going to say, had you ever actually been fired before?
I was on my way to getting fired from a serving job in college, and I took a stand and quit first. So I beat them to the punch.
Did you not even see it coming this time around?
No, it was a bad fit, but I thought I could make it work. I thought I could kind of just bite my tongue. My wife at the time had just started a grad school program in Milwaukee, like an hour drives away, and there just weren't a lot of fee-only firms in the area. So I knew I needed to wait it out until she graduated. So really quitting wasn't an option. I was just going to have to make it work. And apparently I don't fake it very well because it was very obvious that I wasn't happy. And there were also some things that happened that I wasn't happy about, I guess, just in terms of there were some growth goals set for the firm in hiring me and paying me the salary that they were paying me. Because I was 24 making, I think, $65,000 a year, which in Racine, Wisconsin is a heck of a good living. And, come to find out that's not normal for somebody with a year and a half, or not even, I guess, less than a year of experience. And so there's the firm.
So just to be clear, so you got hired for a job. You're a year and a half out from college. You're already getting paid what by that standard is a fairly obscene $65,000 in a low cost of living area to do what actually is remarkably simple work because they weren't even making it hard for you yet. And you were so ornery, you managed to get yourself fired from a job.
Well, when you put it that way,
getting overpaid for your experience while doing relatively simple tasks and having few expectations.
Yeah, it really, it's just funny that, again, when you put it that way, looking at things like just trying to institute scheduling software or trading technology. We were doing paper trade tickets in 2012 when I was at that firm. Like literally one sheet of paper per trade was still the investment process there. So there were just things like that I'm like, I can improve this. I can make this better. And, my dad's words from elementary school ring in my ears where he said, Alan, just because you know of a better way doesn't mean you have to tell everyone about it. So I did not learn that lesson. So sorry, Dad. But anyway, so I was kind of left in this crossroads. Eventually you start to look at the situation and you start to wonder, well, I wonder if it's me and not everybody else, if I'm the common denominator. But I was fortunate that I was in Racine, which is between Milwaukee and Chicago. And I was already registered to go to the NAPFA National Conference in Chicago again. And so I went on down there. It was like 2 weeks after I got fired.
And we're in 2012 now?
2012. Yep. May of 2012. So I have, a whopping 16 months of experience. I've spent 10 months at Rick Kaler's firm, who is very well known in the fee-only community. And so of course everyone's baffled that I quit. And then I've spent 6 months at another fee-only firm that was fairly well known at the time inside the fee-only community. And so anyway, so I started interviewing and talking to firms, and I probably talked to 20 firms that were hiring at some level of anywhere from lead planner down to assistant planner. And I kept hearing the same thing. And I remember one very specific conversation, and this guy looks at me and he goes, Alan, you're the right person for this job. I want you to come in. You're going to help me grow this thing. We're going to double the size of the firm. And in 5 years, you're going to buy me out. And I remember just looking at him going, so I'm going to come in and work my tail off for 5 years to double the purchase price of an asset? That doesn't sound like a very good deal. He was like, well, that's how it's done. I was like, well, I don't care. That sounds dumb. Why would I do that? So I said, well, how about this? We'll do all that, but you give me 50% equity today on an owner's note. I'll help you double the size of the firm to buy out your other half. That makes sense to me. I'll put some skin in the game. And of course that didn't go anywhere. And so, but I think that that's a promise that's made to a lot of planners, right? That one is we'll make this promise to you, but it's going to be unsigned. And I knew that promise of, buy me out in 5 years wasn't going to be signed. So I just kind of kept looking at it and realizing that, I had two options, and I kind of saw three scenarios, kind of three ultimate scenarios. Two options being, one, I could go get a job as a junior advisor, associate advisor inside of an RIA, which, those jobs were available. Or I could start my own firm. I'm 25 years old. I have almost no money in the bank. I had $8,000 in the bank, to be exact. My significant other at the time did not have a job because she was in grad school. And this is like the perfect time to start a firm, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, and I figured if I start a firm, I have kind of two options. Option A, I'm successful. And that's amazing. I own my own firm. I'm successful. I'm working with clients that I love, all the things that come with firm ownership. And if I fail, I go get a job as an associate advisor inside of an RIA. So to me, it was almost risk-free, was kind of how I framed it in my mind.
Aside from the period of time during which you have personal household bills, but no income and no assets.
Yeah, so let's not dig into the details here. Let's just stay at a high level and say risk-free. And I'm
Sure.
obviously guilty of come up with the answer and then, figure out how to rationalize the answer. And so I figured, hey, why not? Other people can do it. Why can't I? So, with a whopping 16 months of experience under my belt, I decided, let's give this a shot. And ended up launching my own firm. And so, made some good decisions in terms of, moved from a very gorgeous 2-bedroom lofted condo apartment with, hardwood floors and granite countertops. I have never had granite countertops since, but I moved into a studio apartment that was less than half the price. I think my rent went from like $1,200 a month to $550 a month or something. Slashed household expenses as much as I could just to, kind of get things under control and try to find some side ways to make money and just try to make it work.
So how does your wife feel all about this at this point? She started with you in Athens. She went with you to South Dakota, hung out with you there for all of 8 months, and you said, we're out of here. Went with you to Racine. You're there for 6 months. Then you're fired. Now you say, all right, we're going to give up the cool loft with the hardwood floors and the granite countertop to move into a studio so that I can launch a firm.
Yeah. Again, when you put it that way, I guess it's why we're divorced now.
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to break up your marriage there.
we can jump right in. No, honestly, I think I framed it as like, hey, we don't have to move again. Yay. Because I knew there were no jobs in Milwaukee. And part of staying in Milwaukee was to support, her being in grad school and that sort of thing. And so just said, no, why not? This will at least keep us in Milwaukee for the next year or two and kind of get through the time that we needed to. But I think that kind of started to shake the underpinnings of the relationship, which, we could dig in as much as we desire. And it's kind of a word of caution for anybody out there that decides to pursue an entrepreneurial path that ultimately, about, I guess, a year and a half after I launched my firm, the marriage ended up dissolving. But is that, when you are somebody who's going to have a stable career, like a PhD in financial planning, and you get involved in a relationship with someone who finds that attractive, whenever you suddenly become a risk-taking entrepreneur that thinks outside the box and tries these new things and puts the family finances at risk, sometimes it doesn't work, honestly. And I didn't recognize that at the time that was a major shift. To me, it just felt like I was coming into my own. But
so she thought she was going to marry professor dude who would work up to tenure and have an incredibly stable income and career. And
right.
Instead, you were launching your own business as the third planning firm job opportunity in less than 18 months.
Yeah. I mean, you've nailed it. And I remember, it wasn't 4 or 5 months after I launched my firm, having to have the conversation of, I don't know how we're going to pay rent. And to go from, the professor tenure type personality to the, very well paying job for just being out of college to suddenly like, I don't know if we're going to make rent, but I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to figure this out. That's a tough transition for anyone, honestly. And again, like, I think it was me kind of, we'll say, shedding some cultural barriers, some social norms that I think had been placed on me in terms of you get a good job, you work hard, you save money, blah, blah, blah. Kind of the same thing we've all heard. And I was kind of shedding that a little bit and honestly just wasn't in the right relationship to support that, which is ultimately what ended up kind of leading to what it led to. But yeah, it was an interesting time for sure.
And I think it's an interesting dynamic. What happens, I think, for any advisor when you're looking at launching a firm and you're married and just what that spousal support situation looks like or doesn't look like. I'm curious how that impacted you as trying to be an entrepreneur, trying to start your own business. It's hard. It's an emotional roller coaster for anyone who's been through that process. Even when it goes well, it's an emotional roller coaster at best. And you're struggling with a marriage in the midst of struggling with a business. I mean, how do you keep a focus through that? Like, are you just that hardwired to be an optimistic dude and just power through?
Yeah, it's a great question. I probably didn't recognize at the time the pressure that it was putting on, but I think the way that we saw the light at the end of the tunnel was, hey, I'm going to own a business. I'm going to have, my vision was 20 to 40 clients. I'm going to be managing 20 million in assets, making 200,000 a year, or working, 15 to 20 hours a week. Because if you're not taking on new clients, it doesn't take that much time to work with, 20 to 40 clients. And, it'll be this kind of stable career. So basically, I'm going to build this stable career that I had always envisioned. And I think that that's what kind of kept the stress at bay for a while. And I will say, ultimately, us launching the XY Planning Network, no fault of yours, ended up being kind of straw that broke the camel's back, because it became apparent that I was never going to just stop.
You were never going to be You were never going to be that stable.
Exactly. It took a while to kind of get around to that, and for me to accept it, be willing to admit it. And I think that was ultimately what kind of ended up having that final effect. And I'll say that for anybody out there looking at starting a business, if your marriage is not right, do not do it. Do not try to start a business. You got to figure out your personal life first, because I have been through relationship hell while starting a business, and it is amazing how much of an effect it has. You really need the support of everyone around you, particularly the person at home, in order to start a business. So if you can't tell me unequivocally that your significant other, your partner, is 100% on board with you starting a business, and they'll do whatever it takes to help you start that business, don't even try.
So how did the business launch go? You'd been through a first firm where you were chomping at the bit for more growth than they were prepared for you to do, which led you to leave and go to a second firm where you kind of blew it up because you were chomping at the bit faster than they were ready to, promote you to a level 1 planner, since you've been there for 5 months. And so now you go out on your own. No one's there to hold you back.
You
So what did that look like? What was the business? What were you doing? Who were you serving? Like, what did you set out to do with this thing when you suddenly had a clean slate?
So I decided in May I was going to launch my own firm, and I actually launched in August. And I got the phone call that I'll never forget, and I will not say who made this phone call. It was not you, but it was someone that pretty much every listener would know the name of this person. And they called me and they said very clearly, very succinctly, Alan, it cannot be done. No one that's 25 years old can start a fee-only firm. No, you can't do it. You need to go sell insurance. Go get your Series 7. You cannot build a fee-only firm at 25 years old. And that was the phone call I needed, because they did not know that at the time that the best way to ensure my focus and success is to tell me something can't be done. And honestly, it was the kick in the pants that I needed. And so I said, well, kind of screw you. Watch me. And I will say that throughout the process, I got lucky a lot. I got lucky a lot more times than not. But I launched with Garrett Planning Network, signed on there because they were kind of the only platform at the time that had kind of a more of a turnkey service. And more importantly, what I was looking for was a community of advisors, just somebody to rely on, ask questions to. And they were really known for that. So I got started with an hourly model, and I was working with individuals and families. So everyone that would come to my office. And what's kind of funny looking at it now was that I actually set up a very traditional firm. I rented an office space. I worked with clients that came in my office and, worked with them face to face, which we can talk about that transition here in a minute. But the couple of things that were interesting in my first 6 months, I did a couple of things well. One was I invested in a website. And, looking at it now, I realize how much better I could have done, but I have no marketing background. But I actually invested a couple grand in getting a really high quality website. And that was crucial because I actually got a lot of business from this crazy place called Google, where people go and ask questions like, how do I find financial planner in Milwaukee? And they came and they found me because I was I was the number one ranked advisor for Financial Planner Milwaukee, Financial Planner Wisconsin within 6 months of launching my firm.
Wow.
So that was
because
huge
you actually
for me.
was that a strategy to spend time on doing SEO, search engine optimization, to try to do well on that? Or was it literally like, I just launched a website and it turned out because it was made within the past decade that it was enough to drift to the top of
a little bit of both. A little bit of both. So I would say my strategy was I did hire an SEO expert who we've actually had on the podcast, Brent Carndiff. So I hired Brent, paid him, I think, $1,200 to optimize my website. I blogged 3 times a week answering questions that clients asked me, like, how do I open a Roth IRA? And, how do I find, what questions should I ask a financial advisor? Those sorts of things. And I did videos of them. So literally these things are so bad. You can go just Google search my name in YouTube and you'll find these videos of me clean shaven from 2012, talking into the camera, basically reading my blog posts. And I did that 3 times a week for a year. And Google loves YouTube. They love video. And so I just had this blog and these videos posted on my website that I had embedded from YouTube. And that's what it took. Honestly, that was my strategy.
And people found you on the internet and paid you. Like, were you just doing straight hourly? Were you doing AUM? Were you doing financial plans? Like, what did your typical clients even look like at this point?
I was hourly plus AUM. I sold a lot of $2,700 plans. So 15 hours at $180 an hour. I sold, I would charge $2,700 for a comprehensive financial plan, 3 meetings, you get the summary at the end kind of thing. And that was kind of my typical business model. And then if they wanted to stay on, then I would do assets under management and then meet with them on an hourly basis going forward, which we can touch on here in a second on why that didn't work. But the other thing I'll add, in addition to Google, which people did find me on Google and did pay me money, they actually paid for financial planning. The other thing I did was I went and I met with every single fee-only planner in Milwaukee, which was like 5 people, which was great. It was a short list. And I told them what I did, who I wanted to do it for, what made me different. And there was one planner, Paula Hogan, who I will give a shout out. She is the only reason I'm sitting here today. She had a firm, Paula Hogan, in Milwaukee, had $1 million asset minimums. And, she would have a $400,000 client come in and she'd go, you know what? We specialize in working with high net worth clients, but there's a guy down the road that works with young professionals. And she sent me about a dozen clients in my first year, which is honestly the only reason I made it.
Taking $400,000 cast offs.
Oh, I know. It's a terrible business model, huh?
I mean, it is a striking thing, for anyone who's listening in the early stage of their business or thinking about getting launched. I mean, I'll give a shout out for this methodology as well. Like, Alan's not kidding here about this. Firms that get higher minimums end up bringing in a lot of business that isn't a fit for them, and they want to send it out. I mean, I know we've been through this in our advisory firm as well. We've actually brought our minimums down in recent years, but they were higher for a long stint of time. And I referred a mountain load of business out to local planners, particularly a number of Garrett planners, because when folks came in and they didn't want, if they did want a comprehensive plan, all the rest of the stuff, then we could still potentially find a way to work with them. When their questions were more finite or the asset base was just lower, we would refer them out. And there's actually an effect that happens. I know I felt it. I think actually a lot of firms do that have higher minimums. We feel guilty when someone contacts us and we have to say no because they don't meet our minimums. And the way we assuage our guilt about saying no to someone is we try to make sure that they land somewhere else that's good, that they find a good home. They're like, the least I can do if I have to say no to you because I've got these high minimums is I want to make sure that I don't just like throw you back to the wolves, that I find a good place for you, that I find a good home for you. And so I would actually go out of my way to refer them to appropriate planners and find a good match for them, and have sent a ton of business out over the years on on that basis. So if you're getting started, like seriously, call all the other fee-only firms in your area that have high minimums and just explain what you do and that you're a good, decent human being and that you're happy to take their miserable $500,000 cast-off clients.
I know it's amazing to look at now, but I'll say that, most fee-only advisors aren't excited to tell a client, I'm sorry, you're not rich enough to work with me. Like, we didn't get into the business to be that way, but we have to be. Whenever you're running a successful business, every $500,000 client is one less $5 million client from a staff and resource perspective. And so, I just kind of set that out there. And, the fact that I was in NAPFA, I was a CFP, I was a fiduciary, kind of had all the same standards. And here I am, kind of this energetic young guy in their office, and they wanted to help. They wanted to help me. They wanted to help these young prospects, and it just worked. And, I met with 5 or 6 advisors. I think she was the only one that actually referred me any business that actually came through. But yeah, I got quite a few clients that way. And so I guess to kind of speed the story along so this episode doesn't take 2 hours, there were a couple of kind of major things that happened throughout my career between then and now, which has been a whopping 4 years now. Seems like a lot longer. One was I read the book, The 4-Hour Workweek, which for anyone that is out there that has read this book, they know that honestly, it was life-changing for me. And it was because I read it and I realized that he talks about the entrepreneur that sits in their office from 9 to 5 because they're supposed to, because that's all they've ever known. Because I mean, my dad did own a couple small businesses when I was growing up, but they were generally 80-hour-a-week type places. They were not, flexible jobs. And I'd never really seen a model where you could kind of come and go as you pleased. And I realized that I was helping my clients build their great life, because that's what we do as financial planners. And I was completely ignoring building mine. And so here I was sitting in an office from 9 to 5, wearing nice shirts and ties, because I did wear ties at one point, as unbelievable as that is, even when I owned my own firm, that I really wasn't building a life that supported what I guess my goals. And so ultimately ended up making a radical change at that point. I opened a second office in Bozeman, Montana, started traveling between the two offices, month on, month off, basically, and basically transitioned my business from all in person, sitting in an office, to all virtual. Ended up, I think, with a total of 1 client in Montana throughout all the time, all the various clients I worked with. Basically ended up moving out to Montana full time in order to kind of live a life that was a little bit better fit for my lifestyle, and transition my entire business virtual. So that was kind of a fun process, but it was actually very easy. I kind of just took the approach of, I told my clients exactly what I just said, which was, I'm not living my great life, and I think to be authentic and be a great planner, I need to. And they said, okay. And I didn't lose a single client over the in-person to virtual transition.
So how far were you into the business at that point?
6 months.
Oh, 6 months. So you had just gotten started with these folks.
Yep. And so, I mean, I not like I had 5 years of trust built up or anything like that. I did it pretty quickly. But I just approached it as, hey, this isn't a bait and switch. It's just a transition I'd like to make. And they said, okay. So made that transition I started traveling to Bozeman in January of 2013, I guess, and ended up moving out here full time in the summer of 14. Yeah. So it's been 2 years now.
So what did that first year look like overall? Because I know this comes up obviously for just a lot of people who are thinking about going and launching their own firm, or going through and launching their own firm. I'm just curious what that looked like. How many clients, if you're willing to share, like how much revenue? I mean, where did you actually stand after that first year?
I made around $45,000 in my first 12 months in business. And again, I was charging $180, and then I moved to $200 an hour. So I basically
that's gross revenue.
That's gross, correct.
Okay.
So let's call it that, I basically did 220 to 250 hours of billable time, because I was billing all hourly at that point. And then, I think my expenses were in like the low 30s, mid 30s, something like that, because I overspend on technology, because I think it's fun and makes me more efficient, and probably made myself overly efficient given the number of hours I was actually being paid to work. But yeah, so I did well on the gross side, not necessarily on the net side, but it did lay the foundation through some business model changes, kind of laid the foundation for future growth kind of going forward. Because then I had a client base to draw from that I was managing assets for and doing financial planning for on an hourly basis.
And I'm just curious, was the office space arrangement a big piece of that expenses as well? Obviously, we've seen a lot of people that got started at well under $30,000 of first year expenses. So I'm just curious what was racking up so much expense there for you in the first year.
Yeah, I think I was spending $325 a month on my rent plus utility, or including utilities. So it was actually a really good deal. Yeah, I just spent money on, CRM. The Garrett Planning Network membership was, $13,000 or $14,000 in my first year. So that ate up quite a bit of capital.
All right, well, that's a big piece of it right there then.
Yeah, I had to pay for my own compliance work with a compliance officer. So that cost a couple grand. The website was, a few grand, and then kind of various technology just starts to add up.
Yeah, but it sounds like almost 20 of the 30 was basically your network, your compliance work for getting started, and your website.
Yeah.
And then the other 10 was all the other miscellaneous technology stuff.
That's fair.
Together. And so how many clients was that?
I honestly don't remember. It was probably in the 25 range, just because I had some that were 15-hour clients and then some that were 2 and 3 hour clients, depending on the job.
So a client or two a month, some much deeper than others.
Yeah, that's about right.
And so is there a point that you sat down and decided, okay, this is working? Like I'm going to do it. I'm going to stick with it. Did you, or I guess alternatively, since you were going through marital strife at the time, I mean, were there points where did you have some threshold? Like if I don't get to point A by time B, then I'm just bagging this thing?
Not really. I've never written a business plan until I got into business with you, or ever had to set business goals. I just have this kind of eternal optimism that I just said I'll figure it out. And so far I have. And so I never really said okay, well, I need to be at this point by this time. I just said, basically I'm going to keep my personal expenses really low. I'm going to keep my business expenses really low, and I'm going to make enough money to eat. And then the more money I make, the more money I can spend, which, is honestly a terrible way to start a business, but it was my kind of bootstrap lean startup mentality. But what I did do was I kept evaluating my business model, and it did not take me very long to realize that I did not want to be an hourly firm long term, because the hourly business model was just going to require so much marketing and just so much churn of clients, because you do a 15-hour job, and then in 3 or 4 years they call you back and they want to work with you, and I kept finding I was working with clients in crisis mode, because nothing seems like a $200 an hour question until you have a bunch of them. And then you're like, oh, I'd gladly pay $200 an hour. And by that point, there was little I could do. And so I just found I didn't love the relationships I was building. And I also discovered that by doing investment only, it was kind of this weird, I'll do your investments, and then I've got to answer the questions about bond duration in China, which I don't know anything about. And then it was also, well, what happens when they ask a financial planning question in the middle of an investment review meeting? Do I charge them for the planning question that took me 10 minutes to answer? Do I not? It was this really strange, these things just kept coming up. So I said, all right, I'm just going to scrap it. And so I launched in August of 12. By the end of 2013, I had been through hourly plus AUM. I went to net worth and income retainer, which we had Andrew Severston from the Planning Center. On a previous episode, I kind of copied their model, because I was actually outsourcing my investments to the Planning Center. They were my TAMP early on, because I didn't know anything about investment management. And so I went to net worth and income, and then that's when I went to kind of using this retainer model to billing monthly. And that's really kind of at the moment that that kind of discovered this was the sweet spot, is when you and I decided to launch the XY Planning Network. And I ultimately did not build a full-fledged business strictly on the back of monthly retainers, because I got distracted with other projects. But I just iterated quickly and realized that, none of my new clients knew any different. And so that, whatever they heard from me was the first time they had heard it from me. And so it was okay to try new things and test things out, and do really, I just remember doing some really stupid things in meetings and thinking oh, never going to do that again. And never doing it again. And that was the only client that ever experienced that faux pas. So it's just kind of funny.
Like what? Like,
so one thing I remember, and this seems so trivial, but like I used to do an action checklist for clients, and it was a summary on the front of the plan that was just to-dos. And in one of my first meetings, I handed the clients the entire list and then tried to go through it with them, and they were jumping around. They were going to number 18, and they were just all over the place, and I couldn't keep them focused. And that's when I learned you don't hand them a checklist. You put it on the TV and you go one line at a time, and you don't let them see the next checkbox, which that was a atrocious presentation meeting. I mean, it went horrible. They got all the information and they were fine for it, but it was a great learning experience to say, yep, never do that again. And I never did that again. So I didn't screw anything up. It was more just like trying things that I thought would work, and they didn't. And so I just kind of moved on.
So I'm curious, as you went through this stage, what your support system looked like. You made the comment, I think more than once earlier, that your style and expectation, both when you were at Rick Kaler's firm and then when you were at Financial Services Group, that your style is you just want to jump off into the deep end, and then if you're drowning, Rick or Mike Hobrook or someone will grab you and pull you back up for air. So when you go out on your own, there's no one there to pull you up for air.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, was that just not a fear or an issue at that point, or what did support structure look like for you?
So this is a great example of it was not a fear, but it should have been. And I was actually correcting it, and I was actually finding a support system unknowingly. So again, got really lucky. And I kind of found my support system in two ways. One was through the Garrett Planning Network. Again, like there were a bunch of advisors in there running hourly firms. And so I was able to ask questions and connect with those advisors and ask them questions. Now, once I kind of moved out of hourly and into retainer, it became less of my community, but it was nice to have those advisors there that were willing to help. But the second piece, and really, very crucial to my career, was forming a study group. So I got a call from an advisor that was forming a study group, and they said, hey, we'd love for you to be involved. And we started out as 6, kind of whittled down to 4 planners and we called ourselves FP hackers because we felt like we were hacking financial planning. The other 3 members of that group were founding members of the XY Planning Network, and having those weekly meetings with other advisors that were going through similar struggles, that were having hard times just like I was, that we could share successes, share failures, express when things weren't going well relationship wise, and just kind of all the different pieces that were there. That was crucial. The other thing that I'll add to that is it was extremely helpful to have, someone to bounce ideas off of, to say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. I'm thinking about doing this other thing. And they would kind of keep us focused. We would keep each other focused, I should say, and just kind of be sure that we were all headed in the direction that we wanted to be headed in.
So I want to stay on this for a moment. Weekly meetings?
Yeah, we met weekly every
Typical
Monday.
Study group I know is like, twice a year we get together and hang out.
No way. When you're in startup, man, when you're starting a business, everything changes every week, it seems. I mean, you can, I always quote Jude Boudreau as saying, the highest highs and the lowest lows all in the same day. That's entrepreneurship. And it's so true. In a week's time, I mean, you could have been quoted in the Wall Street Journal and have landed 2 clients and have lost a client, and you need someone to talk to. I mean, I remember going back and looking at the last week being like, oh my gosh, how do I whittle this down to like the 3 big things I want to talk about today? And it was crucial. So we actually moved to an every other week schedule and immediately went back to weekly. And once we were at 4 people, weekly for, I believe, 90 minutes was our model. And it was absolutely necessary, because the other thing that we did was kind of everyone shared successes and failures for the week, kind of opportunities. And then one person was in a hot seat. So we just focused on that one person's problems. So once a month, you got in the hot seat and you could say, my business processes are jacked. I need help. Or, I'm thinking about redoing my website, or, whatever it was. And the other 3 members would just drill in and ask great questions and really focus on how to help each other. And usually one member would be assigned to help kind of with follow-up. So if I said, I'm really struggling with business processes, it'd be Mary Beth Storjahan. She's kind of the process queen in that group. So she would be responsible for, working with me over the next, month to implement some of the things that we were talking about. And so it just kind of built in this accountability group, but also this competitive nature. So like I'm a highly competitive person, and having other people that I wanted them to succeed, but I wanted to do better than their success was also very beneficial. If you get to a week and you're like, I didn't do anything interesting this week, you're like trying to do something interesting to quote unquote win. But again, always wanting them to succeed. I mean, we used to send each other clients that weren't a good fit for each other. I mean, we were a very tight-knit group, but I still wanted to do better. And it drove me, honestly, to try new things, to think outside the box and to not, I guess, settle down and not to get too complacent with the business. Because when you're in that, that world of that first year or two in startup mode, you have to be on your toes and you have to just keep pressing forward.
So you're iterating down the road with your advisory firm. So remind me again the timeline. So this got launched in basically the fall of 2012.
Let's see, the study group. I launched my business in August of 12. I think the study group started in August of 13. So I was about a year in and they were all kind of launching their firm. So I was just a little bit ahead timeline wise. And honestly, the conversations that we were having were, I was always getting calls from young planners because I was involved in NAPFA Genesis, which, listeners have heard me promote. Get involved in the associations, whether it be FPA or NAPFA, but get involved, volunteer, because your network builds. And I kind of had this network of younger planners. I think I was the chair of NAPFA Genesis at that time. So I was getting a lot of calls from younger people saying like, hey, how did you start your own firm? How did you do compliance? What CRM did you select? And everyone else in the study group was having these same conversations, a lot of times with the same planners. And they were asking us all these questions over and over and over. And in December of 13. Yeah, December of 13, I looked back at my calendar, and in the previous 12 months, I had done 100 phone calls with associate advisors, younger planners, looking to start their own firm that had some question that they were willing. And I had spent 100 one-hour time blocks with these planners, and I was happy to do it. But what I realized was everyone else in my study group was doing the same thing. And that kind of those conversations and realizing just how much we were kind of saying the same thing over and over in different ways was what led me to email you in December of 2013 to say, hey, I have this idea. I think we could help younger planners that want to start a firm. Like, I think there's a business here. And here we are today.
And here we are today.
And I guess to kind of close the loop on it, when we decided to, basically December 13, January of 2014, we decided we were going to try to launch this XY Planning Network thing. I stopped taking new clients for a few months because I just wanted to focus on XYPN. And I didn't take another client, basically, because we started to grow so fast, which was a good problem to have. But XYPN kind of blew up a lot faster than we ever expected.
The good version of blow up.
Yes, in a positive way. And we started hiring people and growing, and our membership grew and all that. So as of in July of 2015, so almost a year ago now, basically a year after we started XYPN, I ended up selling my firm to Abacus Wealth Partners out of Santa Monica, a fee-only firm out there, because I just said I can't do both anymore. And so, yeah, it's funny. It's funny the twists and turns that our careers can take us. And it's one of the things I encourage college students whenever they're looking at financial planning is I know the traditional career path. Now, I know mine's been a little funky. And I don't necessarily recommend my path for anyone, but I don't talk to very many people that have had a linear career path. I don't know very many people that like got their degree in financial planning, became an associate advisor, became a lead advisor, started to buy the firm, bought the firm. Like, that's just not a path very many people take. There are a few, and we've had a few of them on the show. Jake Keebler was a great example back in episode 7, I think. There are a few out there that we were all jealous of, but I did not set out to be B2B. I thought I was going to be consumer facing my whole career. I had no idea I was going to be advisor facing at some point in my career. And it's just funny that just leaving yourself open to opportunities, which was, I guess that again, a lucky mistake that was made, but in a positive way.
So, all right, I'm curious what you would view some of the the takeaways to that for other advisors. You noted a couple of good, fortuitous, kind of lucky bends that came along the way. Referrals from Paula, and I guess even in retrospect, getting fired from financial service group probably didn't feel that way at the time, but looking back at least. So I'm curious. Just I feel like it's a stretch to people to just say, yeah, you just keep going at it and lucky things will happen to you eventually. Like, do you just view it as is that just really how it played out for you? Is there some other dynamic at work here about why you just seem to be like a particularly fortunate, blessed person to have all these things line up for you well?
I have a friend that's involved in narrative therapy, and I remember her telling me one time that narrative therapy is all about writing your script on your history, and basically it's like a connect the dots. So there's a lot of dots on a sheet of paper, and how you choose to connect them is basically the history you remember. And so narrative therapy is all about re-scripting that. But I think that's actually fairly accurate, that we kind of look back and we connect the dots and we say, yeah, these things happened for a reason. They connected the way that they were supposed to. But I try to I don't want to dive off too deep into like the bragging side of things, but I think I did a couple of things well. One was always looking for success in failure. And I know that that's a cliche to say like, my failures were my greatest successes, but you can either choose to let failure, like getting fired, tear you down, or you can choose for that to be what launches you. And I'll tell you what, I want nothing more than for Mike Hallbrick, who fired me, to see me succeed. And it's my competitive nature. I want to rub in his face. And I don't hate the guy. Like, whatever. He's doing his thing. I'm doing my thing. We really have no crossover at this point. I think I've seen him one time in 4 years. But I let that drive me. And I found the thing that drove me, which was someone telling me it couldn't be done. And I think that was huge for me. And I'm just internal optimist in terms of like, I'll figure it out. I have had so many failures along the road. I've had failed businesses. Some folks may remember Content Marketing Exchange, a marketing platform that I launched with a co-founder, and it was a total flop. Now, it didn't cost me a ton of money. It cost me a lot of time and energy, but I learned from there, how to not run a successful business, how to quickly run one into the ground, and brought some of those learnings into the XY Planning Network. But, in failure is looking at it and saying like, hey, what did I do wrong? How did I screw this up? And then don't make those mistakes again. I think failure is making the same mistake again. And I think that was honestly what worked for me. And also just pivoting really fast, failing fast and pivoting fast, and being willing to say, well, that didn't work. Let's try something else. And just kind of staying in constant experiment mode. And again, I will say I got lucky. There are a lot of places where if something hadn't gone my way, I may have fallen flat on my face. But I always had in the back of my mind that failure was getting a job as an associate advisor in a fee-only firm. Like, that was my worst case scenario. So it allowed me to go all in to my plan A, because my plan B was exactly what I was doing anyway. And I think I just always had that in my mind, that worst case scenario, I'll just go get another $65,000 a year job. Now, it may not have been as easy as I thought it would, as I had it in my head, but I kind of knew that opportunity was there. And so I think that let me just focus on the task at hand, which was let's try to make this thing work, and ultimately led me to chase some opportunities that I may not have chased otherwise, and try a few things that, ultimately ended up working out.
So is there any one particular decision that you look at going back that was kind of the crossroads? Like, I did this and it's most contributed to my success or gotten me to where I am. Like, is there a one thing that you got right that just feels like that was the transition point?
Kind of the one bigger thing than others. I don't know. That meeting with Paula Hogan, that was a critical meeting when I had coffee with her actually, and told her what I was doing, and just remember feeling really good after that meeting that I was able to tell my story and kind of get connected in with someone who understood what I was doing and what I wanted to be doing, and ultimately was willing to send me clients. I think that was a huge success. But just being willing to put myself out there. Sending you a cold email about becoming your research associate, later on sending you a cold email about, hey, let's try to make this thing that ultimately ended up being the XY Planning Network. It didn't have that name at the time, and just kind of see and just ask. It's like the worst thing you could have said was no, which is what you were going to say if I didn't email you, basically. Implicitly you're saying no. So I don't know. It's just kind of put myself out there and not being afraid of failure. It was the thing that I got right. And that ended up happening a lot of different times, I would say. But I don't think there's no magic bullet. There's no secret sauce. It really just takes a lot of grit and determination, just putting your head down and pushing forward. And I think I got that part right.
So I'm curious from the flip side here. You've kind of noted that a lot of your success was this sort of rapid iteration, finding things that work and then doing more of that. And I know one of the challenges that I hear from a lot of advisors, I live a version of this myself, is how do you know that you're not changing too fast? Like, how do you make sure that you don't do 7 different things and it turns out the 4th out of 7 actually was the winning formula, but you didn't give it enough time to actually play out?
Yeah, it's something I think about as well, as how many things did I give up on too soon? And I'll say my firm and running Serenity Financial Consulting, I moved on too quickly. Truth be told, I never should have been involved in the launch of the XY Planning Network, because I should have just focused on my firm and built my firm. And anyone around me can tell you that has always been my recommendation to them is, hey, just stay focused on your firm, keep building your firm, because we get pulled in these directions. You start doing something cool and people want you to come speak about it, and they want you to get on a podcast or write a blog post, and you kind of get distracted. And I definitely I've spent my career getting distracted and chasing the shiny object. Listeners have heard me say before that I undiagnosed ADD. My therapist says I have ADD, but I haven't gone to actually get medicated for it. But that has affected me, and it's been what has driven my successes, but it's also, again, what has caused me to move on from other things too fast, and probably has led to some failures that didn't have to be failures.
So that's your business advice to me as your partner, to constantly make sure I try to rein you back in.
No, people say, what has been critical. And if we look at, what has led me to this point now, it has been partnering with you, and it has been partnering with someone who is very different from me. They say opposites attract in marriage, and I think opposites attract in business relationships as well.
Very much in partnerships. Yep.
And that, we're very different. Now, we're not, if we look at personality exams, if there's like 4 personality traits, you and I are similar on 2 and then completely polar opposite on the other 2. I think that the polar opposite are the 2 that people notice, which is the chase the shiny object is my personality. It's not yours. But getting into a partnership with someone who is polar opposite, but that I have a mutual level of respect for. And what I learned very quickly was that, I would leave a conference and I'd send you an email with like 10 ideas and be like 10 things we could do. And you would go through very patiently and you'd say, okay, these 8 really suck. You said it nicer than that, but like, okay, these 8 are a no. And these are some reasons why. This one, yeah, I could see this, but not today, not yet. But this one, this is a good idea. Let's do this. And it allowed, I basically turned you into my filter, which was, keep me focused on what needed to be the next step, because I'm always looking for the new, the interesting, the kind of next step. And what I have learned is that I could do that underneath the XYPN umbrella with various projects, kind of special project coordination, getting new ideas off the ground, that sort of thing, without getting derailed and going and launching a whole new business and a totally different business line all the time. And so for me, it really was saying, look, I'm an extreme personality. If we look at strength finders, my top 3 strengths are futurist, which more of like visionary, kind of where we going, strategic, which is how to make a plan to get there, and then activator, which means get started really fast. So that is a really dangerous combination. And I recognize that I fall onto a side of the bell curve that means I'm going to iterate really fast. And so I just learned really quick, I've got to have somebody in my life that can filter that and kind of hone it and keep it directed. And that's huge for me.
So looking back then, is there anything that you wish you'd done differently in your career and the path that you've had? I guess indirectly you actually said not moving away from the advisory firm.
Yeah, that's funny.
XY Planning Network. I'll try not to take any to that or anything.
Yeah, it's tough to say because, I am a believer that every step along the way leads you to where you are. And so I'm happy with where I'm at. But I do think being a little more patient and slowing down just a little bit. And for me, it was, maybe finding that person in my life a little quicker to help provide that filter. But, it's tough. I will say that I'm somebody who says never live with regrets because there's just no point because you can't change it anyway, but you can learn from those mistakes. And that's what I tried to do was just learn from those failures and try to surround myself with people that complement my skill set, which is, the ability to move on projects very quickly and get them off the ground and get them started. So surround myself with great managers and great operations people and great communication people and that sort of thing in order to kind of keep the wheels on the bus, basically.
And so as we wrap up here, I know this is a question you like to end interviews with when you do them from your end. So I'll ask the same thing of you. If there's one thing you wish you had known coming in, looking back, like if there's something I guess you could go back and tell younger you to have known coming in, what would it be?
Oh man, I have to have asked this question 25 or 30 times out of our 50 episodes. And I've often thought what my answer would be. It's kind of funny to actually be on the receiving end of the question. It kind of depends on which age we go back to. So I would say just to make it relevant for listeners, if I go back to the Alan that was trying to make the decision on launching a firm, get your finances in order. Like I wish I had known how hard it was going to be, and just how stressful starting a firm was going to be. I wish I had saved a little more whenever I had the opportunity. When I was making $65K, now granted it was only for 6 months, but I made some poor financial decisions and got the nice apartment and got the nice truck and didn't stick with things long enough. I didn't save the money that I could have saved. I could have put myself in a better financial position than I did. And it really set me back by not. So I would say that, I wish, even though it was only 18 months from graduation to launching a firm, I wish I had done a better job of getting my finances in order, whether it be keeping expenses down, saving money, and just finding those side income streams that were available that I didn't take because I was making enough money. Just get your financial side in order. I wish I had thought that through a little more clearly.
Yeah, and I know when you had me telling my story, I went through a similar dynamic.
Except you did it right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I was better framed for it coming in, but it was the same dynamic. I lived very frugally through most of my 20s. Well, yeah, I guess I didn't let my lifestyle creep up as much in the first place. So I'd build a big pile of savings and was still living in a dirt cheap apartment I was splitting with two buddies. And so when I made the transition, which for me was stepping back from the advisory firm to do this writing and speaking thing 8 years ago, I had I didn't have much upkeep to maintain because I had a fully paid off car and I was living in a dirt cheap apartment I was splitting with some buddies, and I built up some cash savings. And so that was a huge kind of buffer and relief of knowing that I knew where I was going to be paying my bills for quite a while. And so I could just focus on trying to build the business, which is stressful enough, but not have the added layer of anxiety of watching myself run out of money or fearing I'm running out of money and not being able to pay my bills at all.
Yeah, and let's not understate that fear and the stress that comes with that. Mary Beth Storjahan says it well. She used to laugh that we were all mullets, looked good in the front, but it was a party in the back, or maybe it was a hot mess in the back is more like it. But I lost a lot of sleep. I have lost a lot of sleep in my career over money. And I'll say that money has been a massive stressor. It has stopped me from doing some things that I wanted to be able to do and probably needed to be able to do from a business perspective. It has caused pressure on me when starting businesses to try to find how in the world I'm supposed to pay my bills. That is stress that is not fun. It is really unfortunate. And if there's one thing I could will away for people, that would be it. And we like to say, oh, it's the life of an entrepreneur. And no, it's the life of an entrepreneur who didn't make the right financial decisions going into being an entrepreneur. You don't have to be that way. I chose that path and shouldn't have. And you took a better path than I did. But yeah, it's that one thing that Again, and it's something I tell young planners is, you can start a firm for less than $10,000 on paper, but you still got to be able to pay your bills, and it takes a while to get the firm up and running, which we've talked about previous episodes. So,
yeah, I mean, that's still, I think, the thing that buries most. I mean, for other industries, being an entrepreneur, like, you just get buried by the business expenses. You want to open up a restaurant, you got a giant rent, you've got to buy a whole bunch of ovens and equipment, and you're going to take on a giant pile of debt just to get your restaurant started and have huge payments to make, and then have to go hire a bunch of staff and servers, and just the raw business expenses. If you don't get customers coming in fast enough, you just flat out go bankrupt on the business. And advisory firms are very different because most of what we're selling, getting paid for, is our time and our labor. And you don't really need that much physical overhead, right? We don't have a bunch of equipment to buy. The software in the grand scheme of things is fairly inexpensive. It's not like buying a $50,000 fancy oven. And and a lot of the expenses are fairly modest. The piece that buries planners getting started and going out on their own is, it's not the business expenses. It's the personal
side
expenses. It's just being able to pay your own bills while you're waiting to make enough money out of your business to get to a livable wage.
Yep. I totally agree.
Well, thank you for joining us. I know I really had to twist your arm to get you onto the show, so I really appreciate you taking the time out to join us on XYPN Radio and share your own story as we get to this, I think, really cool 50 episode milestone. Milestones are always fun to celebrate, so this was a pretty cool way to celebrate one.
Well, thanks for getting in the other chair. I think you'll be just fine launching your own podcast to be on the asking questions side, which, hey, keep bugging Michael Kitsis, Michael at XYPlanningnetwork.com, to keep bugging him to get that podcast launched, and maybe he will here in the next few months.
Maybe I will.
But hopefully, and I do hope this was helpful just in terms of getting some questions answered for folks, just to I kind of shared my story throughout the first 49 episodes in little pieces. So hopefully give some people context as to kind of the whole story. But don't forget to join our VIP. I'll put myself in the interviewer seat here. Join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. And feel free to ask me more questions there. And maybe they turn into a mailbag episode, or we can just answer them there in the Facebook group. So, but yeah, happy to be on. I hope this was helpful for some folks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, that was certainly different, but hopefully it was helpful. Now, before we close out, there's one thing that I do want to kind of clarify, because I know I focused a lot on sort of the bad parts of the various steps along the way, particularly when it came to my personal life and getting divorced. I wanted to be honest and real and tell you what really happened, but I think it's important to point out a couple of things. First, obviously, there was a lot more to the relationship story than me launching a business and getting divorced. Obviously, we only talked about that side of it. But I think it's fair to say that relationships involve a lot of various components, and that was simply one of them. And second, just because you're an entrepreneur doesn't mean you can't be in a relationship, and it doesn't mean you can't go from stable to crazy like I did with while losing your partner. Being in a relationship, it's all about being in a relationship with someone that understands you and is willing to grow and change with you. And I hope it's something that all listeners either have or find someday. I will admit I've been fortunate enough to find that person, and I can say it makes a world of difference in your business life when your personal life is where it needs to be. Now, remember to join our VIP community where you can ask XYPN members, previous guests, Kitsis and myself questions, as well as interact with other members of the VIP community and other listeners of the podcast to get their perspectives at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. And that's also a great place to go if you have additional questions about my career or have anything else that you'd like to hear about. And be sure to join soon to take advantage of XYPN 16 conference ticket discounts. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.